So as some of you guys know, I have finally been able to play Tengu Plant in paper. Like, we have started doing Tengu Plant locals here in Utah, and it's incredible. Like, I'm so excited. It's every other week right now, but I will literally take a train for like an hour and a half, and then just get picked up to go play at these locals. And it's really started as grounds for it. It's been kind of small, but it is definitely growing. And I got to give a big shout out to Dazu the Devastator. That's my boy. Me and him kind of started this. Basically, I met him the first time they tried doing Tengu, and we kind of were like, hey, let's just keep showing up. And so this kind of started where me and him, it would be just me and him showing up, playing Tengu against one another. And slowly but surely we're growing, and we're getting like actual full tournaments now, which is, or at least semi full tournaments, which is pretty cool. We can actually play out a tournament, and that feels amazing. Just hopefully give some of you guys some inspiration that if you really want to make it happen, which for Tengu Plant format, this format is incredible. You absolutely should try to make it happen. All it takes is two passionate people to just show up and start making people want to do it as well. But yeah, it's been a blast, and this is something that really excites me because this really gets to, like, I guess, reinvigorate my love for this format, because I don't really have the luxury of playing in online tournaments that much. I don't really have the time to do it, and usually I'm streaming them. So I don't get to really play as much as I'd like to, which for this, obviously this is pretty low stakes, but I get to play in my local Tengu tournaments, and that makes me really, really happy that I finally get to do that. And so something that happened this week is I ended up playing Worms, which I wanted to talk about because I went undefeated with this list, and this is a really spicy build that I cooked up, and I think a lot of you guys are going to find it really interesting and like it. This list played very, very smoothly for me, and I'm hopefully by doing these Tengu locals, I'll be able to show you a lot more lists. This lets me kind of use my creativity and put decks together and just kind of test them in one-shot tournaments, and like I said, pretty low stakes, so I don't have to worry about results or anything like that. But this list did perform well, and so I wanted to do kind of a standard deck profile, but I want to clarify that at the end of this video I will put the dueling book like full picture up so you guys can see the full list, just so it's not entirely like all real cards, but I want to use real cards. It's been a while since we used real cards. I'll also put the download link to this list in the description so you guys can give it a try yourself if you want to try it. But yeah, we'll just kind of hop right into it. I'm excited to kind of talk about all the crazy things we did with this list, so we'll kind of just jump right into the main deck to start. So for the Worm package, we obviously have Worm King, and then I did 3 Worms X. If you don't know what Worms X does, this is the one that sends a reptile from your deck to your graveyard. This can include Worm King, so like this is kind of like the brick, the garnet of the deck. You don't want to hard draw it, but it can be summoned off Nebula Meteorite, which makes it like insanely strong. Another key thing about Worm King that I don't think a lot of people know or realize is its effect to tribute a reptile and pop a card is not once per turn. So you can do some really crazy things with that, and we'll kind of get there a bit later. But yeah, a non-once per turn pop goes really, really hard. I literally in tournament had a situation where I resolved the Meteorite on 2 worms and summoned this, drew 2 cards, summoned this, and then just as soon as it went back to my turn, I just tributed and popped all of their back row. Like, and you can even tribute set monsters, like set reptiles as well. They don't have to be face up, which is really, really good. And so the other worms that we're running is we're on 3 copies of Carteros. And the reason for this is like your searcher. It's almost like a Geargia armor, except worse because its defense is really low. But this card is really nice. It can even search itself, which is pretty cool. But this is like pretty essential to the deck. I do like this card a lot, and I built a lot of synergies with this card in this build, so we'll kind of explain that later too. And the last worm we're on 2 copies of Yagan. I'm gonna put them down here. I don't know how much you guys can see of the map, but yeah, so 2 copies of Worm Yagan. This is the entire worm package, so these are the only worms I'm on. I low-key considered running like Wicked Worm Drake or something. It's like a vanilla dark reptile, so I could send it off of Zex to put a dark engrave. But it is a bit awkward. But you will see this build is kind of chaosy, which is also where Worms X comes into play. It's really nice because not only can you send the Yagans to like set the Yagan back to your field to like have that defensive and kind of get the +1, but it also can just dump a light at any given time. So you can summon Zex, send a Carteros, and now you have a light in graveyard. And so you kind of have like a chaosy engine to it. So we'll kind of dive a bit deeper into that as we move on to the next set of monsters. And so we have a chaos package, right? We have one BLS and two Chaos Orc, and that's going to sound kind of high because, you know, typically the only darks you're going to be running in this list is going to be like the tour guide package, which I am on, plus Sangan. So that might seem a little light, but we got some spicy techs in here still to go. So just to explain this, tour guide actually has fantastic synergies. Like Yagen banishes itself after it summons itself back with a Zex. So you can Leviair back the Yagen, which is pretty nice because then anytime you summon a Zex, you can summon back the Yagen. This card, like, it just becomes really annoying. But the nice thing about this list with the Chaos package is when you summon Tour Guide, you can make Leviathan and detach, so that can instantly put a Dark in the grave. And when you summon Zex, you can send any Light monster, which will instantly give you a Light in the grave. This basically means that either of those normal summons will result in setting up whatever you need for your graveyard, which is really nice. This deck is actually semi-monster heavy compared to most worm builds. Most worm builds are very like back row oriented. This list definitely has back row, but it is nowhere near the level of like your standard set 5 pass type of worm deck. This deck almost plays more to combo, which is really cool. I honestly almost considered going up to 3 Chaos Sorcerer because I just like wanted to see it more. But I do think this ratio is kind of ideal for what I'm going for. But then we also have to talk about the last little package of like dark monsters that we added in so we could facilitate this chaos strategy. And it's going to be one of my new favorite engines I've been testing in a lot of different decks, and that's going to be Dark Mimic. So we have 2 copies of Dark Mimic level 1 and 1 copy of Dark Mimic level 3. And this probably doesn't make a lot of sense, and I'll have to kind of explain it a little later when we get into the traps and like talking about Nebula Meteorite. But essentially, Dark Mimic level 1's effect is it's just a flip effect monster that when it's flipped face up, when it's flipped, you get to draw a card, right? And then during your standby phase, if this is still on your field, it can send itself to the graveyard to special summon Dark Mimic level 3. And then Dark Mimic level 3 is, if it's destroyed by battle, you draw a card. But if it was summoned by Dark Mimic level 1, if it's destroyed by battle, you draw 2 cards. So I really, really like this engine for the sole purpose of, just as an example, I set a Dark Mimic level 1 turn 1, and my opponent summons Tour Guide into Sangan and they attack. Well, this walls it, it's going to replace itself, and then during my standby phase, this is going to, because like this has 1000 defense, this is going to tag out in my standby phase, go into Mimic level 1, and I can crash this into their Tour Guide for a draw 2. It goes really, really hard for no reason. This also applies to the Agent Earth, because Earth has 1000 attack, so it's not crazy uncommon for that to happen. When it does, it's obviously kind of a big blowout. You're going to plus a lot off of that. The other thing I noticed while playing this list is that Dark Mimic level 1 was actually a big bait for my opponent to feel like they needed to remove it because they're actually afraid of the tag out. So like, for example, if this card got flipped up, I saw people like main phase 2 Scrap Dragon or, you know, do kind of crazy things just to get rid of it. But this card already replaces itself. So, like, I don't really care if they blow resources to out it. In fact, I would encourage them to because I'm not really losing anything. But, like, basically all you do is you summon the Mimic level 3 and then you just crash it in what do they have for the draw 2. So, like, there is still a threat of, like, not only is this going to put 2 darks in your graveyard, it's also going to give you a draw 2, which is really insane. Like I said, I might do a video talking about how this applies to other engines. Because there's a lot of decks that could actually use this. The other thing to talk about is Dark Mimic level 3 is a Tour Guide target as well. So this gives you an extra access to another card to summon off of Tour Guide, which obviously is really, really good. I mean, the more times like a single Tour Guide can resolve, instead of summoning Tour Guide with Tour Guide, you can summon Tour Guide into Mimic. It can be really, really nice, especially if you're going for like mind control plays or something where you like summon Tour Guide and you already use Sangan. You could just put a Mimic in defense, which if they destroy, it still is going to draw you a card. By battle, of course, but still, it still gives you like a pseudo floater that's like kind of annoying for your opponent to deal with. So I really, really like it. And then the last 2 cards that we have in this list for the monsters is going to be, I ran 2 copies of Effect Failure. And this also has really weird synergies with Dark Mimic level 1. If Mimic level 1 is set and they don't attack it, for example, you can flip it up, draw a card, you can summon the Veiler, and then synchro into Formula to put a light and dark in graveyard and draw another card, which I think is like really, really good. So yeah, that's kind of like the main engine. I guess I should probably go a bit deeper into the Mimic level 1 as well, because there is still a few other concepts with this, why this is actually good. In Worms particularly, this is what I really like about it, is it's not uncommon for you to have multiple sets, or specifically, like, let's say you have a Yagin set, right? Or even a Yagin face up, it doesn't really matter. If you have the Yagin face up, or like set, and let's say they summon a monster, they try to attack, and you Nebula Meteorite, right? You flip up the Yagin, and it's going to bounce their monster, so they no longer can attack. And then you flip up the Dark Mimic level 1, and that's going to give you the draw. What's crazy is Nebula Meteorite resets all light reptiles, but doesn't reset the other monsters it flips face up. So that means the Mimic level 1 gets its draw, and now it's face up, which means going into my standby phase, if they don't out this, I get the tag out for the crash, which basically gives you like absurd pluses, because you're going to draw one off of the Yagin, you could special summon Worm King, this is going to tag out and give you a potential draw too. It goes really, really hard when it can resolve, and I do have some tools that can help make that resolve, but that's kind of the main thing to think about with this deck, is like this combo right here, like it just gives you a nice like draw engine that also gives you lights and darks for your chaos strategy. So now we'll talk about the spells. The spells are actually fairly simple. Like there's actually not a lot of them. We just have a simple Heavy Storm, Dark Hole, Monster Reborn package. I ran Mind Control because you summon tour guides, you summon like level 4, so you can easily steal a Tengu or their Sangan or something, TG Warwolf, and exceed with them. And I think that's fairly common and playable to do. So, you know, you already know I think this card is like absurdly broken. And this is also really nice. For example, like, let's say I summon a Zex, send a Yagin. I can set the Yagin to my side of the field. Then I can mind control their monster and exceed with the Zex. And you can even go into a card, we'll do Wind Up Zenmeister. So we are on a copy of this. But with that play, you can even do Wind Up Zenmeister, which can then detach to like set a Yagin or something like that. You know what I'm saying? Like there's some cool plays with it. But yeah, we'll keep going on the spells. We got Book of Moon. This is a kind of a no-brainer. You're running a lot of flip effects. This could go hard. And then double Pot of Duality. I'm not on 3 because I actually found most of my turns I'm special summoning. Like I said, this isn't a standard control deck. Like Worms is typically seen. I actually have a lot of turns where like I'm going to summon a tour guide and special summon, or I'm going to summon a Zex and then try to special summon a Yagin, or I'm going to try to activate Nebula Meteorite and then go for like draw combos and special summon the Worm King. You know, there's a lot of things that a lot of times where you need to special summon, especially with chaos monsters. So this card I almost considered cutting altogether, but I do kind of like it to search like that one missing piece you're needing, like for example getting the Nebula Meteorite. I also set this as a bluff a lot because again a lot of times it's just not live. Alright, moving on to the traps. We're gonna first talk about the bread and butter of this deck. If you don't know what this card does, this is W Nebula Meteorite. This card, this is a modern Yu-Gi-Oh card that existed in 2011. Like, this card has like 3 effects and they're all very, very good. So the first effect it does is it's going to flip up a monster. So like, and if like either player have a set monster face down in defense, it will flip all face down defense position monsters face up. That's the condition to activate it. So you do need a set monster in order to activate it. And then during the end phase, you can change all light reptiles back to face down defense, draw 1 card for each, and then after you do that, you can special summon a level 7 or higher reptile monster from your deck. So this card, just with a single like worm monster, like even if you just have a Yagin and you set this, they summon a monster attack, you like flip the Nebula Meteorite, Yagin bounce, you're going to draw 1 card for that Yagin and then special summon. This card is just so absurdly broken. It is far and away the best card in the deck. I have managed to draw like 3 cards off this card before. Like this is like so absurdly broken. You need to max out on this, and this is basically your goal is to resolve this card. Once this card resolves, you probably win. This is why I think Worms are actually really, really good. People kind of underestimate this deck. It's not a very popular deck, but this card just makes the deck just so disgusting when it goes off. And so, yeah, 3 Nebula Meteorite, absolute staple. And then I actually have This is like a spicy tech I'm playing in this list, which I think is like really, really good. Like I said, I'm not playing standard worms, so I don't have a lot of defensive options. I actually have a lot of offensive options. So the next card I have is to Call the Haunted, and the reason for this is because a lot of times, I mean, there's multiple reasons for this, but a lot of times the common counterplay for things like W Nebula Meteorite is after you resolve it, they just end, or main phase 2, they dark hole, so then you don't get to set your cards, draw cards, and special summon, right? That's the counterplay. But the nice thing about Call of the Haunted, and what Call of the Haunted does is, I'm gonna have to pull out some monsters so you guys can kind of visualize this. But basically, let's say they do dark hole, and I have like a Carderos in the grave, and Nebula Meteorite has already resolved. Well, then I can like Call the Haunted back the Carderos, and then Nebula Meteorite will reset the Carderos. I'll draw one card, I'll get the special summon, and on my next turn I can flip Carderos back and get a search. So this can help you with dealing with what your opponent's doing. It also is just really nice for bringing back cards like Worm King, because Worm King, again, is a really powerful card. If like you hard draw it or something, you can tribute summon, they warning, you can Call the Haunted it back, whatever. Or if they just out the initial Worm King with like a dark hole, bringing it back is very, very strong. But the other reason why Call the Haunted is in here is actually because of the Dark Mimic package again. So the nice thing about this, which like you have two ways to play it, you can do this during your opponent's end phase to reduce the risk of max C, or you can do it during your draw phase, which can also reduce the risk, which like it gives them a better max C, but also gives you kind of better odds, I guess I would say. So like Dark Mimic level 1, you want to tag this out. So like if you do this during your draw phase, I don't have Dark Mimic level 3 in my hand. Well, now I can Call the Haunted, bring this back, tag it out, and then boom, just crash for a draw 2. It's kind of similar to how like KFC can do like you Call the Haunted back at Karaz and get the draw 2. Call the Haunted with Dark Mimic level 1 essentially can give you a draw 2 in that same light. Which is really good. So this is a very versatile, actually, like, I'm surprised more Worm players aren't on Call of the Haunted. I think this card is very, very good. It's also nice because since you aren't really running a ton of back row and you don't want to be crazy back row heavy, you don't really want to run Starlight Road, for example. Call of the Haunted gives you a nice chainable option to like punish your opponent's blind MSTs or even heavy storms, because you can bring back the Sengen you get off Tour Guide, right? And there are even a lot of instances where I would even just go like Tour Guide into Sengen, detach the Sengen for Leviair and then set Call the Haunted with an extra back row. So then I could like play around the blind MSTs or like the heavies while simultaneously, almost guaranteeing I get that Sengen search, even better than if you were to just leave the Sengen on board, which I think is pretty cool. All right, and then the last couple traps we have a couple defensive options here. So we have the 2-dimensional prison. This is kind of self-explanatory. You do want attack negation, and so I guess to go alongside that, I have a single copy of Mirror Force. This card's like almost a must in this deck because you want to block attacks and do stuff with it. And then we have the warning and the solemn package. So we actually only have 6 actual defensive traps in this deck, which is kind of crazy for Worms, right? Like, most people think of this as like a very heavy back row deck. You're running like bottomless, you're running everything. I'm only on 6 defensive options, and this felt like more than enough. This was fine. And then we have one last spicy tech card for this list, and it's going to be Ultimate Offering. And you might think that this is so I can have a really powerful, potent explosion in my main phase. It is not. It has nothing to do with my main phase at all. It actually has everything to do with my opponent's battle phase. So what's really cool about this is during your opponent's battle phase, you can like essentially use this card to set extra cards to resolve a meteorite, right? So let's say they have a big monster on their field and they're going to be able to swing over like the likes of a Carderos, right? If I know they're going to kill my Carderos, but I still need to resolve a W Nebula Meteorite, I can hold this in my hand, take a direct attack or let him kill something else, and then still in battle phase, I can Ultimate Offering to set this card and then resolve the Meteorite to get the search. And the crazy thing about it is you can activate the Meteorite in the battle phase, flip this up to get the search, and then pay 500 still in the battle phase to normal summon like Zex, for example, to get more worms on the field, which will then give you more draws when they get reset. It's really weird how crazy this card goes, especially again because you can also set Mimic and then still use the Nebula Meteorite. This has so many applications to what you can do, and even just going a bit further, if you're afraid of getting your Tour Guide Veilered, you can summon Tour Guide in their battle phase to get a Sangan or whatever, right? Like, there's a lot of different options that this gives you in terms of like how you can play the game. But I do absolutely love this card. The card tested absurdly well, and it really spooked people too. Like, I remember I played against Kara Curry, for example, and he had a Watchdog on the field, which only has 600 attack, but all Kara Curries must attack if able, right? So like, he enters battle phase to swing direct for 600, and I flip an Ultimate Offering, and then I just set a Dark Mimic level 1. And the scary thing for him was he had to attack into it, so this flips up, and now I get the tag out on the next turn. So yeah, it really does a lot of weird things, and you can even go as far as just setting a Yagan in response to your opponent's attack, so like they can't like remove it during their main phase, and you can just set this, and so if they have like a Synchro monster on the field, now they either attack into it or they have to try to go for some type of removal in main phase 2 to not flip this card, which I think goes really, really hard in this deck. It just creates a lot of pressure out of nowhere for no reason. And then also just with, as an example, let's say you have like a Mimic and a Carderos set, right? You could like flip a Carderos, search like a Yagan or a Zex, and then you could like summon the Zex, flip the Mimic, draw 1, and then you can exceed these guys back into the Zenmeister, detach, reset the Mimic, and then it'll flip and draw again. So you can do some like crazy draw combos with this, or same thing applies to Carderos. You can like set a Carderos, reset it, flip, and search again. It opens up a lot of weird plays with Ultimate Offering, so like you can use this on your main phase for some cheeky stuff. But I really like it for your opponent's battle phase. That's why it's only a 1-of. It's not something you really depend on, but it does help a lot. I actually cut Torrential Tribute for this card because I found that Torrential, there are too many times where I want to keep my monsters on the field. I want all my monsters to be a pest for my opponent to deal with, and so I don't want to ever nuke the whole board. I'd rather just leave it open and like have attack negation versus summon negation. So that's it for the main deck. There are a ton of crazy synergies, as you can see. We'll move on to the extra. All right, so moving on to the extra deck, we have our Exceed monsters, and we actually use one of all the rank 4s because rank 4s are one of your more common plays. I definitely made all 3 of these cards during my time playing the tournament this week. And I would say all of them are necessary in their own ways, right? Like I already talked about how many weird applications Zenmeister has with this deck of like resetting some of your flip effects. You can reset a Yagan to like double bounce, stuff like that. Utopia is obviously really nice for blocking attacks, and it's a light or whatever, which, I mean, you're usually exceeding with light, so it doesn't matter too much. Roach also gives you the exceed option that's a dark, so this can create a dark out of nothing. And also, I really like this card with, like, in conjunction, if you have, like, a Yagan and a Nebula Meteorite, if you make a Roach, then they're forced, they can't, like, normal summon a monster to, like, crash into this or attack over, because you can bounce with, like, Yagan, and simultaneously this can prevent their bigger monsters from summoning. So Roach goes really, really hard in this deck. Like I said, I think all 3 of these are necessary. We still have a couple other Exceeds. We just have Leviathan Leviair, pretty standard for a tour guide package. I don't really think that needs much explanation. Onto the Synchros, we have 1 Trish. I never used this card. 1 Scrap Dragon. This card has come up before, but it didn't come up in tournament. Like, level 8 Synchros are going to be pretty rare, but they are possible. So we've got like the Scrap Stardust, and then for level 7s we have Black Rose and Arcanite. This can be made with the Chaos Orcs and an Effect Veiler. Same thing goes for Black Rose. And since you're on Call of the Haunted as well, you can like bring back your Chaos Sorcerers and, like, you know, banish a card, then summon Veiler, Synchro, stuff like that. You know, there's a lot of applications to it with Call of the Haunted, and that's why these cards are actually fairly good. A single copy of Bryanak. I didn't really make it, but we are on the formula, like I mentioned. So this is the only level 6 you're on. So there's an absolute universe where it's like I have a level 4 and then I synchro for 2, then synchro for 6. So you do need this card. This also can pitch like lights and darks and stuff, which is kind of nice. And it can also bring back Dead Call of the Haunteds. When your Dark Mimics tag out, you can, like, if you do it off of a Call of the Haunted remains dead on field, so Bryanak can bounce those calls back for you, which is kind of nice too. A single copy of Librarian with Call of the Haunted or even like a Mind Control or something like that, Monster Reborn. There is a perfect universe where with a Dark Mimic and a level 4 monster, you could, in theory, make Librarian plus Formula. It's kind of a pipe dream, but this also gives you an out to Cataster, like, which you don't really have a ton of outs to, so this gives you an extra deck out just like for a level 4 to like swing over a Cataster. Armory Arm, this is just because of like Sagan plus a Veiler can put a Light and Dark and then give you a Search. I guess Cataster as well, but that's pretty self-explanatory. And then of course the formula, just because of the Dark Mimic level 1, drawing into like a Veiler summon for another draw, again, puts a Light and Dark in your grave, gives you a lot of draws, which is pretty cool. All right, and then lastly, we are on to the side deck, and the side deck actually was pretty relevant. This is like another thing I really like about this build. So similarly to like my TG Agents list, where like in game 2s and 3s, I could just side out the entire TG package and put in things that are better for my matchup. Basically, same logic applied for this Worm list. A lot of times, if I wanted to swing a matchup really hard, like against like Plants or something, I would just side out the entire Mimic package and then maybe both Chaos Orcs. And that's 5 cards right there I can just put in for free against the deck to give me a good, like a solid advantage. And so some monsters that were really, like, came in a lot. The first one is going to be Fossil Dyna. I sided this as a 2-of. This card came up huge because you can set it with Nebula Meteorite. And I actually had this. My opponent did a Tengu plant play. So they summoned Reborn Tengu, used Glow Up Bulb, synchroed into 5, and then specialed the other Tengu. And then, like, and that was their turn prior. I set Fossil Dyna and Nebula Meteorite, and they heavied me on the next turn, and I just flipped Nebula Meteorite, flipped this, blew up their Tengu and their monster, and they couldn't get the third Tengu because Fossil Dyna's still face up. This obviously isn't gonna get reset, and you can't resolve Meteorite's other effects when you do that. But it is a really nice chainable back row that could just flip this and like blow your opponent out, and then you just have a face-up defense position Fossil Dyna on their turn, which is really, really potent. So this card's really good. It also has great synergy, again, with Call of the Haunted. I remember after I did that, I was thinking, if my opponent outs this and goes for another extension, like, for example, a, like Spore, Glow Up, or something in their grave, I can chain Call of the Haunted on my Fossil Dyna, bring it back, and then they can't special summon, which I think is really, really cool. Then I also was on a copy of Neospacian Grand Mole, mostly because I think this card kind of swings the hero matchup pretty hard. And yeah, I don't know. I saw this with like Falcon Punch at Worlds Finals. I saw how relevant this card was when it came to just swinging into your opponent's monsters and bouncing them. So I felt like this was a worthwhile card to add. I didn't actually use it, but I did actually side it in against things like Plants and stuff as well, where they're making big synchros and I want to bounce them. 1 copy of Breaker. This is because you can't really run... what's it called? You can't run Decree because your deck still does need to resolve Nebula Meteorite. So this is like an out to Decree. That's also a dark monster, which I kind of liked. And then I had a single copy of Thunder King. Again, like, you have a lot of normal summons in this deck, so you don't really want to put in more than one, but this is for things like Car Curry or Plants when going first or second. Like, I would kind of adjust these ratios between going first and second, because if I'm going first, I'll probably put in like the Fossil Dynas and the Thunder Kings. If I'm going second, I'll put in the Max C's over those cards against the likes of Plants. So I was on 2 copies of Max C. But that means like my entire hand trap ratio for this deck was 2 Veiler, 2 Max C, so 2 Veiler in main and then 2 Max C inside. I don't think you really need more than that. We're on triple MST just because of anti-Decree. Again, you're not super worried about Decree, but this card obviously comes in handy for specific decks. I could think of, like, for example, you're against like Gravekeeper. You do need it. So this could side in occasionally for me. I didn't actually put it in a whole lot. For the most part, I was just happy with my single heavy. I'm not really worried about my opponent's back row, because most of like my plays just set up my graveyard, and they don't actually like amount to anything that like I care if they stop, right? If they like Veiler a Yagin or like Torrential a Yagin or something, or I mean a Zex. If they Veiler a Zex or Torrential a Zex, I don't really care. Like most of my plays are just like, they're just already plussing me cards, so I just don't give a shit what they do about it, and then eventually I'm just going to explode with my Chaos Monsters later. 1 copy of Closed Forest. This was just for Gravekeepers in the event someone played it. No one did, so I didn't run into it. And then I side the single copy of Trap Dust Shoot. This is for Agents specifically. I just think it's good to side in. I didn't want to main it just because, I think it's actually kind of better as a side card. I did 1 copy of 7 Tools of the Bandit. Only reason for this was I figured if I'm against an actual heavy back row deck as well, I felt like this could potentially come up where this can interrupt like crazy plays or something. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know. I thought it sounded cool on paper. I don't really know. Like, I was thinking like for like heroes specifically or stuff like that, where like you really need this to prevent a big tempo swing. So I kind of liked it as a one of. I never put it in again, but this is just an option if you're against like a big back row deck. You could put an MSTs and a 7 tool since again you can't run Decree. And then lastly, just 2 Black Horn of Heaven. This is pretty standard these days. This is again like I'm going first against like Tengu plants or something, so I might put these in, which you know felt pretty good. But yeah, that is it for this deck. My matchups in the tournament: round 1 I played against Dragoonity. Round 2 I played against Karakuri, and round 3 I played against Tengu plants. And yeah, I think, I mean, for the most part, it performed really well. I only opened Worm King once, I will say, which, like, that's obviously the Garnet. The one game I did open it, I did lose, but I don't think it was because I opened Worm King. It was because my opponent just had the nuts, like, everything. And, you know, sometimes it'd be like that. But for the most part, this deck performed very, very well. And, again, I really like this style of Worms where it's actually playing more towards, like, the combo-y, chaos-y build. Rather than just like the I'm going to set a bunch of back row and play very defensive. This is a very offensive build, and it pluses like crazy. Virtually every card replaces itself or gives you a +1 and like converts into a bigger play, which I really, really like about it. And like I said, I think this deck is hard underrated in the format. It's not very popular. I think back in the day it was kind of like a degen deck, if I'm being completely honest. But going back on it now, I think the deck is really, really cool. Like, for the most part, most people look at this list through the lens of, like Robert Boyajian, his like, what's it called? Robert Boyajian played Worms and he topped the YCS with it the one time. If I'm being honest, at the time it was incredible. He's a great player, but the list nowadays is actually pretty terrible by comparison to what like more modernized lists. I would definitely say either way, Tour Guide in Worms is the way to go. Like I said, it is so OP to be able to have 2 normal summons that will either put a dark in your graveyard or a light in your graveyard, right? I can even say, like, during the tournament, I even summoned Zex just to send a Worm King to call the Haunted back the Worm King, and you can then pop the, like, tribute the Zex to pop a card, right? Like, so this can create, like, cool plays, too, where if you, like, don't have a W Nebula or Meteorite, but you need a big boy, Worm Zex can convert into getting a big boy. There's some, like, small things to know, like, for example, with Zex, you can only summon back Yagin if the only monster you control is Worm Zex. But this is also where Call the Haunted can come in handy, right? Like, if you already have a Zex in your grave, you summon this, they warning, well, I can Call the Haunted back to Zex, and then I can just summon the Yagin, right? So, like, sometimes just by having, like, bringing back one of these monsters at a given time, it can just give you a plus in that same light with, like, Zex, which is really cool because then, again, as soon as you resolve this combo and have these 2, well, now that's 2 monsters for Nebula Meteorite. So this is going to be a flip, a bounce, a draw 2, and a special summon, which is just absolutely insane for the format. Like I said, I think this deck felt really, really good. I would highly recommend, at least for Worm players, you know, like, the Dark Mimic strategy felt really good. I don't, like, you know, I kind of liked it because it's kind of like a pseudo upstart, but it just put more darks in your grave and then has kind of a higher ceiling with, like, your Call the Haunted and stuff like that. So I actually liked it. Again, it was a bit of a side out in game 2s and 3s, but that's just because, like, if you can side in better cards for your specific matchup, it's good. So this is like a really good generic game 1 engine that can come out later at, like, basically no cost to how your deck functions. But I really, really did enjoy playing all these cards in this list. And I will say either way, like, if you don't want to opt for this, I would still highly recommend Call the Haunted in your Worms list. This card tested so incredibly well. Again, like, just activating Meteorite, like, they Dark Hole set Yagin, I chain Meteorite, and then it just dies. And then during the end phase, when Meteorite's attempting to resolve, you just Call the Haunted, bring back the Yagin, it sets, draw, and then special. It goes really, really hard. So I would highly encourage people to try playing Call the Haunted in this list. But yeah, that is basically it for the deck. I'm sorry that it was kind of long, but there's just a lot of crazy synergies that I was able to, like, implement with this list. So I'm really curious to know what you guys think about it. So let me know in the comments how you guys feel about this list. If you want to try it again, I'll put a link to the list in the description. But I think for the most part, that is going to wrap it up for this video, you guys. So we are just going to give a quick shout out to my patrons. So shout out to Wabi Adam, Eric Gagnon, Slapgod, My Dude, Photoshooty, Brian Ford, and Sven Olbrehen. Thank you guys so much for the support. Other than that, thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe, and have a great time doing today.